So I've been a fan of Jonah Hill since Superbad, and his career since then has been pretty crazy. He started off playing these goofball characters, but then he just turned into a legit serious actor. So what's the next logical step after that? Well, writing and directing, of course. What else? And you know, I love movies made by one person with a singular vision. So it would make a lot of sense for me to be excited about this one, but it just didn't look that appealing to me. Nothing about it really grabbed my attention, it just looked sort of fine. And hey, I also grew up in the 90s, so this should be right up my alley. But that was actually one of the reasons I was a bit skeptical, because I'm not huge into nostalgia. Certain things, sure, but whole decade? Not really. And there's been a lot of movies cashing in on nostalgia lately too. Mainly the 80s, but it's been creeping into the 90s too a little bit. So I was hesitant but still cautiously optimistic, you know. I wasn't expecting a disaster or anything. And well, this definitely wasn't a disaster. Pretty much the opposite actually. Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies of 2018 for sure. So what's the movie about? It's about this kid who lives with his mom and his big brother. And things at home are a bit complicated and less than ideal. But then he runs into these older kids, skaters, and he gets obsessed. All he wants to do is skate, so he gets bored and starts hanging out with the older kids. And thematically, I feel like this movie is about looking to be accepted and trying to find friendship and camaraderie. I think that's basically the gist of it, but there's a lot more to it. The story itself, the narrative, really isn't all that, but the depth is mostly in the subtext. And the interactions between the characters and all the little details, not the big picture. On the surface, it's a really simple movie, but beneath that, it's actually deceptively complex. And the amount of stuff this thing crams into less than 90 minutes is pretty nuts. I mean, this thing is a roller coaster. It's funny, it's sweet, it's sad, it's tragic, it's triumphant, it's wild, it's toned down and subtle. Just one thing after another, and it's all just seamless. I don't think there's a moment when I went, well, that didn't work, or that could have been done better. And you know what? I don't think it has very much to do with nostalgia. This thing just happens to take place in the 90s, because Jonah Hill obviously grew up in that era, and has an emotional connection to it. And the fact that those were simpler times, without cell phones and constant internet access, just makes it easier to tell a story like this. I mean, kids are always gonna be kinda dumb, you know? Because they just don't know things. But let me tell you, kids in the 90s were morons. Because you couldn't fact check things instantly and call people on their bullshit. And that's kinda endearing, and you just couldn't tell a story like this in this way in modern day society. But here's the thing, it's not about the PlayStations and the Discmen and the Super Nintendos, or the fashion or the CRT TVs or the beat up hoopties. And this movie gets that, but most movies don't. They think it's all about the surface level stuff. But it's really not. It's about a different time and a different society. And about a kid growing up in that environment, trying to make sense of the world, you know? And yeah, this thing hit home unlike any quote-unquote nostalgia movie I've ever seen. Because I could relate to it, but it's also a really compelling story. The way this thing looks too, I mean, probably helps, but it doesn't really matter. It's shot in this boxy aspect ratio, and I'm pretty sure it's shot on film too. And all the lighting and all that looks very much like the 90s. But that just helps build the atmosphere, it doesn't really make the movie what it is. It's more of a gimmick, I feel like, than anything else in this movie. Because the rest of this thing is far from gimmicky. It's authentic and just feels honest. This is Jonah Hill's honest expression of what it felt like growing up in the 90s. And while I grew up in a very different place in different circumstances, I could relate a lot. Because some things are universal, and if you tap into that, it's gonna come across as authentic and relatable, in a way that a movie just looking to cash in on nostalgia never is. So yeah, I thought this thing was fantastic from start to finish. Just a great movie all around, and I mean, Jonah Hill did something special with this one. But would I recommend it? Yeah, go watch it immediately. Or don't, but you should. However, I'm not your dad.